Just a few years after Jessica Meyer's debut album, Ring Out, we now have another portrait album from her called I Long and Seek After, featuring her own compositions and viola recordings. Jessica, it's a pleasure to speak with you on Classical Conversations. And before we delve into I Long and Seek After, I was wondering if you could give us an overview, just a bigger picture of you and your artistic journey up to this point.
Sure. So I'm a longtime violist, recent composer. I did a little dabbling with creating my own music when I was a teenager with a lot of computers and stuff like that. And I was very fortunate to grow up in a place in Long Island where music education was a very serious endeavor, and I was taught to improvise and do a lot of things that classical players don't normally do. And so, which led me to compose. But when I got into Juilliard, all that kind of shut down to what I thought I needed to be, which was an orchestral violist. Um, and fast forward through my career, I spent a lot of time auditioning, making the finals of different orchestras, but never getting a job. And so I decided to build my career in New York as a new music violist, a violist around town, and educator. And it wasn't until when I started writing for myself in loop pedal that I realized I had something to say, and I kind of tapped into what I did a lot as a child, which was mess around with sound and made things up in order to express the moods or the different things I was going through. And then once, it's about 10 years ago, about now, I wrote something for my colleagues to play. And as soon as I heard other people play my music, I realized that this is what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. So 70 some odd pieces later, and some albums. I've spent the past 10 years writing for a lot of people, but also writing for myself because I'm still very much a violist and I love playing chamber music. I love my colleagues, and I'm here to write a lot of music. And I also particularly love singers because I did spend a lot of my professional time performing with singers in New York, but also spent a lot of time as a kid watching MTV in the 80s. So I am like a walking catalog of songs. Uh, and and so I think a lot of that those two things kind of came together for this album, I Long and Seek After.
So yeah, let's tap into that interest in song and art song as well. I know in the liner notes you mentioned some inspiration and study of art song by Robert Schumann. I think for a lot of classical listeners, also Schubert comes to mind. To what extent were you following in those footsteps or departing and just traveling the path less traveled?
I think what I love about art song is versus, let's say, huger art form like oratorio or opera. I love just how intimate art song is. I love that you could tell these little stories, whether it be a love story or a song of longing or grief or nostalgia. You know, all these songs in a way, a lot of art songs in a way like are like pop songs. Either they're very overtly emoting what the text is about, or they're sort of dancing around the subject. There's the veneer of something that kind of sounds, wonderful and happy and charming, but actually underneath there's this whole other meta, emotional landscape going on. So I think that, and also spending a lot of time, I think in conservatory, just listening to having other singers come in and, you know, we're talking about music theory and we're analyzing these different songs and, all these six chords and stuff like that. And what is why those chords at that point, that juncture of the text? And that's basically what I love doing as a composer. It's just like writing songs makes my job easy because my job is to serve the text. How can I best use the wealth of colors and sounds available to these particular instruments in order to express what the text is about? Uh, and also, long time ago, like when I first started to do more solo work, and chamber music work about 15 years ago, I decided, I'm like, I love working with singers. I love the Brahms songs. I love chamber music with singers like Britten and all that stuff, and Barber. And so I set out to play more of that. And then when I started writing, I thought, man, it would just be great if a lot more of that was in the world. Where, let's say you don't have a piano around. Because often, if we're showing up for a gig somewhere, you're not met with the piano, you're met with a piano-shaped object, you know? So, it's like, oh, wow, okay, this is this instrument, let's do the best we can. Uh, so I love the idea, like if you have like a singer and a string player, you could show up and you can perform. Kind of how we're now as musicians going back to after exploding to big concert halls and chamber music in Alice Tully Hall, which was never really the appropriate space for chamber music, when you go back into someone's home and when you're going back into a patron's home or house concerts and that intimacy and the small group intimacy, what repertoire exists for singers and strings. And I'm just here to expand that.
Tell me more about how you decided on the specific text that you wanted to include in your new album.
Originally, this started off as an idea of an EP for the Lorelei Ensemble because I did write this song cycle for them, I Long and Seek After, which is my 21st century response to Frau Lieben and Leben, A Woman's Life and Love by Schumann. And it was originally just going to be that. And then we started thinking, well, EPs are hard to get out there. And also, I just happen to have all this other vocal music lying around. My first composer portrait album was a lot of chamber music with strings, and then my piece for Room Full of Teeth. Um, so and since then, and before then, I've just had, again, a lot of vocal chamber music because those are my colleagues I happen to be working with and being commissioned by at the time. So that's when this album came about. And all of the text, so for instance, this I Long and Seek After, is using Anne Carson's translation of Sappho fragments, which I loved sort of creating an arc of like what would be the song cycle to really better represent the woman of today as opposed to what Schumann thought in the 19th century. And the other texts, a lot of them are by poets that are alive, and I know. I mean, Jennifer Beatty for On Fire, No After You. Jennifer is also a great mezzo, but she writes amazing poetry. And uh, Weatherspoon, who I met through this commission through City Music Cleveland, they are young, but they write like someone well beyond their years. And that's for Welcome to the Broken Hearts Club. I resonated it with so much because all the things I think I was trying to express through my little piano when I was 17, they're doing through their poetry so succinctly. And so I kind of like put those things together for that piece. Thomas More did The Last Rose, that's like an old poem, but yet I feel like is so relevant now. And Space and Chains, that's Laura Kosciuszki. She's up in Michigan. Really very viscerally, but abstract surrealist poetry that really just where the words, just the images she conjures takes you to this very specific place. And so I kind of came up with some viola sounds to go with that with soprano to really try to how do I capture this really uh, poetry that doesn't land right away, but then after a couple times you're like, oh, okay, that's what she's talking about. So yeah, so I had a lot of fun, mostly living poets.
Maybe you could elaborate on some of the special techniques that you use. And I was listening to Rain, and there's kind of some percussive effects in there. And just throughout the album, what are some ways that you, as you mentioned, serve the text?
I love my viola in lots of different ways. And so I thought for rain, like having the whole intro would be me trying to mimic raindrops, just very slowly coming and getting faster and faster and dying away. And even the rest of Rain, I'm doing pizzicato in a way that's kind of more like a janky guitar than Brahms viola.
And the terror of foxes and the children's hospital and the hangman's alarm clock, and the official on the doorstep.
Sometimes I ask the singer to speak instead.
I would not think to touch the sky with 2 arms.
Like sometimes things just need to stop and like, let's have a conversation here for a second, just for like a phrase. Um, I love playing stuff inside the piano, the middle movement of On Fire, where we're just hitting all the strings to sound like you've fallen deep into this dark well. Yeah, I love exploring anything that arm instruments can make. And that's just something that I've learned over time as a long history of being a professional musician, playing other people's music.
And seek
Let's talk about the title of the cycle you wrote for the Lorelei Ensemble, and also the album title, I Long and Seek After, certainly begs the question of after what? What is it that you feel like you're longing and seeking after? What are some themes that are in this album?
Spiritual enlightenment. Let's see. Finally healing your patterns. No, I think that those are definitely. I'm turning 50 this year, and it's funny. I'm looking at the album cover art right now, and you just see me on a beach. My husband took this picture, and you just see like footsteps in the sand just going every which way. I'm like, yeah, that tracks. Um, so I think it's exactly like what hopefully if we're not asleep in our lives and just doing the day to day thinking that's what we're supposed to do. I'd like to think that everybody when they get to this age are asking these questions of am I doing all that I'm supposed to be doing? Do I know all I'm supposed to know? Have I really looked back and taken stock of what's really happening? How much of that is my own conjuring and how much of that is actual events in reality? How much of like all of these things, and then if you look at the poems, that's basically what they're tackling too, because so much of them are about relationships, so much of them are like what's happening between people. There's one person's reality and then there's the other person's reality. It's like, and so I love how the text is really, most of it is from a person's point of view, either on love or desire or heartbreak or reconciling or nostalgia or justice. Uh, and especially the end of I Long and Seek After, um, the text is I used to weave crowns. And there's this gorgeous, gorgeous video that Danny Harris made for us and the Lorelei Ensemble. Um, that, in Schumann's work, when the husband dies, it's sort of made to sound like this woman's life is over. And whereas conversely, I would love to live at a time where as women age, it's actually really seen as something that's extremely positive and empowering, and to be tapped for women's wisdom and capacity, and to hopefully know that they've done everything that they've wanted to do. And this video sort of tackles that. So I think, sure, there's a lot of things in here from my perspective, and one would say a woman's perspective, a wife's perspectives, a mother's perspective, but also in broader perspectives, regardless of gender, of what are these feelings that we have for ourselves and for others, and how all the different ways those can play out, and that we're hearing different stories through the poetry of others, and I'm creating sounds to try to dig deep into emotionally what I think is going on. And that's just my opinion on it, but that's what I at least sought out to do.
I can tell there's so much thought that you've put into this. And I'm wondering, from your current perspective, if there was a piece of advice you could give your previous self, if you could go back in time to advise yourself, what might that be?
Love yourself more and don't take everything so seriously.
I love that. Perfect piece of wisdom. I think we can all take that to heart. Jessica, I want to thank you for your time today and for your musings, your insights on the new album. We're looking forward to sharing I Long and Seek After, and also happy 50th birthday from WGTE.
Thank you very much.